If you don't move that junkyard on wheels by sunset, I'm towing it myself." The words came shrieking through a megaphone at 7 in the morning, waking up the entire block. Karen, clad in a pink jogging suit and wearing sunglasses that screamed mall cop power trip, stood on the edge of her lawn like a dictator addressing her citizens. The problem? That junkyard was live-streaming everything to the regional sheriff's office. Every word, every step, every eye twitch of hers was being recorded, on 3 different feeds. It had all started innocently, or so it seemed. The RV had shown up 3 days ago, parked neatly on the curb beside Lot 42C, next to the mailbox cluster. It was sleek, matte black, and nondescript. No bumper stickers, no antenna arrays, nothing flashy, just an unassuming vehicle with darkened windows and, oddly enough, 2 no trespassing signs printed in small military-style font. Most of the neighbors barely noticed it. But Karen? Karen noticed it the second she stepped out for her 6 a.m. HOA patrol walk, clipboard in hand like she was storming the beaches of Normandy. To Karen, the RV represented everything wrong with the world. Disorder, rebellion, and possibly non-compliance. And she didn't like that she didn't know who owned it. She knocked, no answer. She left a note, no response. She called the HOA hotline, which was just her own voicemail. Nothing. For someone whose calendar was filled with fake emergencies like fence slats too gray and wind chimes audible from 6 feet, this was a code red. A foreign object had entered her kingdom, and she would not stand for it. The RV hadn't moved since it arrived, yet no one had seen anyone enter or exit. There were no tire marks, no open doors, not even a whiff of cooking smells from inside. To Karen, this wasn't just a vehicle, it was a direct act of defiance. "It's scaring the children," she told a neighbor, who responded with a confused, "What children?" Because everyone knew most of the neighborhood was retired or empty nesters. But Karen wasn't one to let facts slow her down. The moment she saw it, she began documenting. Not just casual photos. No, she brought out the drone she had bought for wildlife observation and flew it dangerously low to capture aerial views of the RV's roof. And the RV? It filmed her right back. What Karen didn't know was that this was not some weekend warrior's RV or some freeloader's hideout. It was the mobile command center of none other than Sheriff Duke Riggins, currently deployed for a multi-agency sting operation targeting suspected fentanyl movement through suburban hubs. The RV was outfitted with high-resolution cameras, encrypted networks, body heat sensors, audio triangulators, and 2 live satellite uplinks. While Karen was scribbling citations in her notepad, the sheriff and his team were running surveillance ops through her hedge bushes. Sheriff Duke had seen her type before, well-meaning but dangerously entitled. Still, he figured she'd get bored and move on. But then came the sticker. One afternoon, Karen stomped right up to the RV and slapped a neon orange, HOA code violation. Immediate removal required, sticker on the front windshield. Well, technically, she slapped it on what she thought was a windshield, but was actually a reinforced camera housing. The moment the adhesive made contact, the entire interior system flared red. Sheriff Duke watched the alert flash across his secondary screen. Camera node 3 obstructed, manual override triggered. From a hidden speaker embedded in the vehicle's exterior, a calm voice stated, "Federal vehicle. Do not obstruct." Karen screamed and jumped back 5 feet. Then she accused the RV of trying to intimidate her. Then she threatened to sue it. Then she made a Facebook Live video from her phone while pacing in front of it, referring to it as a threat to suburban peace. The next morning, she returned with reinforcements. A tow truck rolled up behind her like a knight answering his queen's call. She'd hired a local contractor with a sketchy van and no uniform, and the poor guy clearly had no idea what he was getting into. As the metal arm reached toward the RV's front tires, the vehicle suddenly lit up, literally. Flashing blue lights erupted from hidden panels along the side. A large screen embedded on the back flipped open, displaying bold text, "Law enforcement vehicle, stand clear." A high-pitched alarm wailed twice and went silent. The tow truck driver froze mid-motion. Karen froze mid-rant. Several neighbors appeared on their porches, coffee mugs in hand, jaws slack. The RV door finally opened. Out stepped Sheriff Duke, wearing a baseball cap, flannel shirt, and tactical boot. He looked more like someone's grizzled uncle than a lawman, but his badge clipped to his belt made everything else irrelevant. Karen's face went pale, then red, then weirdly purple. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Duke gave a slow nod to the tow truck driver, who promptly backed up his truck and drove away like the pavement was on fire. "Ma'am," Duke said calmly, "you've just interfered with an active federal investigation." Karen blinked. Then she tried to talk. Then she pointed at the RV and said, "But it's ugly." That's when Duke pulled out his phone and played back one of the recordings, the one where she called the RV a hollow-eyed death trap and accused it of being a mobile meth lab. In the background of that clip, her voice clearly stating, "If no one claims it, it's mine now." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Possession of government property. Nice." The crowd of neighbors chuckled. Someone clapped. Karen looked around in betrayal. These were her people. The ones she had kept safe from inflatable lawn Santas and rogue Halloween decorations. Now they were laughing? But it was too late. The cameras had caught everything. The microphones too. Homeland Security had already been pinged the moment she made physical contact with the surveillance gear. And because she had uploaded the whole thing live, the video was currently going viral. She tried to spin it. "I was only trying to enforce neighborhood safety. The HOA has every right." "Not on federal vehicles, you don't," Duke interrupted. "And certainly not during an undercover operation." Karen clutched her clipboard like a holy relic, looked up at the sky as if it might offer her a reset button, and took one slow, shaky step back toward her house. The sheriff didn't stop her. He just leaned on the RV and watched her go, like a man who'd seen this play out one too many times. What Karen didn't know, what no one knew, was that this was just the beginning. Because the real criminal Sheriff Duke was after? He lived 4 houses down. And Karen had just blown 3 months of covert work too. Sheriff Duke Riggins had seen a lot in his 30 years on the job: high-speed chases through cow pastures, meth labs disguised as taco trucks, even a squirrel that helped take down a burglary ring. But this neighborhood HOA drama was climbing the charts fast. After the Karen incident, as the task force had already started calling it, Duke had to reevaluate not just the operational integrity of the sting, but the mental stability of suburban self-government. The worst part? The real suspect, a man named Tony Delgado, who lived just 4 houses down from Karen, was now spooked. Duke could feel it in the way the curtains didn't twitch anymore, the delivery guy stopped coming, and the energy around that house felt a bit too clean, too quiet. Duke sat in the command center, staring at multiple feeds. The RV's cameras were still rolling, but the damage was done. Karen's interference had triggered emergency review protocols. Even now, his tablet pinged every few minutes with agency emails. DA wanted a timeline update. FBI asked if the sting was compromised. Homeland Security was simply confused why a homeowners association president had walked up to a federal surveillance vehicle and started measuring its distance from a stop sign. Duke didn't have a good answer, only video evidence that looked like a deleted scene from a mockumentary. Karen, on the other hand, had gone full delusional. Instead of backing down, she now believed her confrontation had somehow corrected a governmental overreach. She had already posted 3 Facebook updates. One showed her standing near the RV pointing at it like she'd discovered a hidden missile silo. Another claimed she had forced a rogue government agent to reveal himself. The third was a 12-minute rant comparing the HOA charter to the Constitution, although she couldn't quite pronounce preamble. Meanwhile, Delgado was slipping away. The man was suspected of laundering cartel money through fake landscaping businesses, cash that was being funneled through local contractors into luxury home upgrades and crypto accounts. His house, while modest, had a back garage that had been under quiet observation for months. Deliveries came at strange hours. Boxes were carried out and never returned. The utility readings were suspicious. Duke had been using the RV to monitor that house specifically because it didn't draw attention. Until Karen turned it into the most famous vehicle in the zip code. "Duke, we got a situation," came a voice through the earpiece. It was Agent Colby from the DEA unit supporting the sting. "Delgado's trash pickup didn't happen today. Not because he missed it, he canceled the service. No movement since the incident. You think he's spooked?" "I think he's gone," Duke replied, rubbing his temple. "And if he is, we can thank our dear friend Karen." There was silence on the other end, followed by a soft chuckle. "Want us to pick her up for obstruction?" "Tempting," Duke said, half serious. "But we'd need a bigger net. That woman's ego is bulletproof." Still, Duke had to admit Karen had unintentionally triggered something useful: attention. Now that the feds were involved more directly, the HOA's actions were being examined in a new light. Turns out, Karen had been running the HOA like a private dictatorship. Residents were fined for things that weren't in any written bylaws. Funds for community projects had been reallocated toward Karen's pet initiatives, like the $8,000 concrete swan sculpture at the subdivision entrance that nobody asked for. Her favorite quote, reportedly, was, "Power unused is power wasted." It got worse. An ATF analyst doing a casual sweep through public records flagged something interesting. Several of the HOA's recent construction permits had been fast-tracked through the city office using signatures that appeared suspiciously similar. In fact, they matched Karen's handwriting. She had forged internal votes to approve everything from new neighborhood signage to a security fund, which, upon closer inspection, was used to install motion sensor sprinklers in front of her house to keep kids off the lawn. Duke forwarded the findings to Agent Colby, who responded with a meme of popcorn-eating raccoons and a note. "We digging into this?" "Oh, we're digging," Duke replied. So while Delgado's trail cooled, a new front opened up, one just as tangled. The HOA's internal records were a mess of half-legitimate paperwork, bizarre fines, and complaints that had mysteriously vanished from the system. One resident had tried to fight a $300 holiday light intensity violation only to have their appeal rejected on the grounds of neighborhood vibe disruption. Another was charged $75 for having a wind chime that chimed at frequencies disruptive to avian peace. These weren't just power-tripping annoyances. They were financial penalties backed by bank liens and legal threat. And the real kicker? The HOA's security company, an outfit named TriWatch Services, was unlicensed. No bonding, no insurance, no record of training. Just a P.O. box and a logo designed in Microsoft Paint. Which meant the so-called security patrol that Karen occasionally bragged about deploying to check on residents was just two high school kids she paid under the table to wear black polos and drive around in a golf cart with a flashing orange light duct-taped to the top. All of it screamed misuse of authority. All of it screamed liability. And all of it was now being reviewed by people who didn't like being interfered with, especially when the interference came in the form of HOA power grabs. Karen, blissfully unaware of the full scope of her unraveling empire, decided to escalate once again. She called an emergency HOA meeting, at her house, of course, and invited a local reporter from the neighborhood lifestyle blog to cover the government intimidation of private citizens. Her flyer read, "Taking Back Willowridge, a stand against overreach." The irony was so thick, Duke could barely read the words without laughing. That night, Duke repositioned the RV. He didn't leave the neighborhood, just moved down the block, parked directly across from Karen's house. The windows remained dark, the engines silent, the antenna array humming just under the noise floor. Inside, the command center was alive with agents reviewing documents, analyzing audio, building timelines. "Think she'll hold another press conference?" one agent asked. "Probably from the roof," another replied. Duke sat back in his chair, hands folded over his belt buckle, watching the neighborhood through the monitor. Karen had created chaos thinking she was protecting order. In trying to enforce the rules, she'd broken half of them. In trying to take down a so-called threat, she'd become one. And now, in an unbelievable twist of fate, she had managed to draw so much attention to herself that her entire fiefdom was being audited by agencies she didn't even believe were real. He sipped his coffee and smiled. Not because the sting had gone according to plan, it hadn't. Not because Karen had gotten what was coming, she hadn't yet. But because sometimes the best informants are the ones who have no idea they're being watched. And Karen? Karen had just made herself the loudest, most traceable problem in the entire operation. Which made her not just a nuisance anymore. She was a lead. A liability. And maybe, just maybe, the crack in the foundation they needed to bring the whole operation full circle. The sound of Karen's voice once again echoed through the street, this time muffled behind closed doors as she ranted to a group of HOA board members seated uncomfortably around her dining table. There were cookies and lemonade on the table, but no one touched them. Every person in that room knew something had changed. The moment the sheriff's RV lit up like a Christmas tree and the words, "Federal Command Vehicle," flashed across the screen, things had shifted from neighborhood politics to something way bigger and far more dangerous. But Karen didn't see it that way. She saw herself as the underdog hero, the one standing up to unchecked government power. Her version of events was rapidly evolving into a full-on conspiracy theory, and anyone who dared to question her was either in on it or too brainwashed to see the truth. Across the street, inside the newly relocated RV, Sheriff Duke and his team monitored the meeting. The audio surveillance feed was crystal clear. Karen, pacing back and forth in her kitchen slippers, recounted the events with a few adjustments. According to her, the sheriff had admitted the vehicle had no right to be there, and the lights and sirens had been a malfunction. "They're bluffing," she told the group, slapping a printout of a blurry photo she had taken from her window. "It's just a scare tactic. We need to escalate." Duke leaned back and shook his head slowly. It wasn't just that she was lying, people lied all the time. It was the confidence, the conviction with which she twisted the facts. Karen had no idea the room was wired, that every phrase she uttered was being transcribed in real time. The walls of the RV were now covered with sticky notes, timelines, red string maps, and folders titled things like Operation HOA Kano and Karen's Financial Paper Trail. She was no longer just an annoying suburban caricature. She was a person of interest. Agent Colby walked in with a laptop and dropped into the chair beside Duke. "You're not gonna believe what I found," he said, spinning the screen around. On it was a scanned ledger, HOA financial records going back 6 years. Among the entries were strange reimbursements labeled as community morale events, which, when clicked, revealed charges like steakhouse dinners for 3, a spa day at a luxury resort, and even a charge for consulting fees paid to someone named TJ, who turned out to be Karen's nephew. Duke stared at it for a long second. "She's laundering money through the HOA. Not the cartel's money," Colby said, "but definitely misusing funds. And it gets weirder. TriWatch Security? That fake company she hired? Their bank account was opened the same month those reimbursements started. Guess who the sole account holder is?" Duke didn't even need to guess. Karen was running a miniature financial operation in broad daylight under the cover of neighborhood beautification. But the real punch to the gut was what came next. "We ran a backtrack on Delgado's most recent contacts," Colby continued, lowering his voice. "Guess whose name shows up?" Duke looked over. Karen. Apparently, Karen had unknowingly, or maybe knowingly, approved a landscaping contract last quarter with one of Delgado's shell companies. The company billed for shrub installations and pest control services. But no such work had ever been done. The payments were real, though, which meant Karen, self-proclaimed neighborhood savior, had actually helped launder cartel money without even knowing it. Duke rubbed his temples. She's not just a distraction anymore. She's a liability and a link. And so the scope of the operation changed again. Karen's unhinged pursuit of RV eviction had led them straight into the heart of a corruption ring that had been quietly pumping cash into local contracts for nearly 2 years. What was meant to be a sting focused on one suspect now had a second front, the HOA itself. Later that afternoon, the federal teams met at a safe house nearby. They needed to make a decision. Delgado had gone quiet. No phone pings, no car movement, no deliveries. There was a real possibility he had slipped out during the chaos. But Karen? She was still here, still running her mouth, still printing flyers calling the sheriff's RV a neighborhood cancer. And Duke, to his credit, saw a new opportunity. What if we let her keep talking, he proposed. She's already got a bullhorn. Let's give her a stage. At first, the agents looked confused. But then Duke laid it out. If Karen thought she had scared off the authorities, she'd double down. She'd brag. She'd throw another public event. And if they were lucky, Delgado or one of his associates might feel comfortable enough to show up again, especially if they still had HOA deals running through her. The plan was risky. But the more outrageous Karen became, the more eyes she drew. And eyes were what they needed. Sure enough, within 48 hours, Karen had scheduled a town hall against tyranny. She hired a food truck, set up a podium in her driveway, and passed out buttons that said Karen versus the machine. The absurdity of it all would have been funny if it weren't real. Lawn chairs lined the cul-de-sac. Retirees showed up, half curious, half amused. Some people brought popcorn. But sprinkled among them were plainclothes agents, wired and ready. Karen took the mic like she was running for Senate. Her speech was a garbled mess of neighborhood pride, suspicion of government vehicles, and wild accusations about mind control signals in LED streetlights. And then, in the middle of the chaos, a black SUV rolled up. Duke saw it from the RV's rooftop cam. The vehicle had tinted windows, no plates, and the signature low rumble of a bulletproof engine. It parked at the far end of the cul-de-sac. No one got out. No one waved. But Karen noticed it. Her tone changed instantly. And to those watching right now, know this: you don't scare me. This neighborhood is protected. This is our turf. Duke's radio crackled. We've got eyes. Matching registration to Delgado's last known vehicle. It's him. Everyone froze, figuratively, not visibly. The agents didn't flinch. No one moved toward the SUV. But the wheels had turned. Delgado hadn't left. He was watching, possibly listening, maybe waiting to see how Karen would play her next move. And she played it big. She raised her HOA binder into the air like a holy text and declared she would now be licensing all federal vehicles that enter Willow Ridge. It was nonsense, but it was enough. Delgado had heard what he needed to hear. He pulled away slowly, a predator not quite done stalking his prey. Inside the RV, Duke whispered, "That's all we need. He's back in the web." Karen had no idea what she had just done. Again. And as she soaked up the applause from the confused audience, cameras still rolling, Sheriff Duke smiled. She wasn't just a distraction anymore. She was the bait. By the following morning, Sheriff Duke had already drafted the revised op plan. The situation had officially shifted from controlled surveillance to active engagement. Karen's town hall debacle had done exactly what Duke hoped it would. It flushed Delgado back into visibility. But what no one expected was how deeply Karen had entangled herself in the operation. It wasn't just that she was laundering money through bogus landscaping contracts or that she had committed multiple municipal violations. It was that she had unknowingly created a web of local influence powerful enough to protect someone like Delgado, all while genuinely believing she was protecting lawn standards and HOA dignity. She had become the perfect cover. And now she was going to be the perfect trap. Duke sat in the RV, watching the edited footage from Karen's speech for the third time. The audio had already been passed to analysts for voice stress analysis, and the facial recognition software had flagged several people in the crowd who had ties to businesses used in Delgado's laundering network. The SUV from the previous night had left fingerprints on a nearby mailbox, and those prints had confirmed what Duke suspected. Delgado had not only returned to Willow Ridge, he had parked directly in line of sight of Karen's driveway and stayed long enough to finish a smoothie he bought at the food truck. Surveillance cameras at the truck showed him taking a flyer from Karen herself and laughing. That was the crack Duke needed. Delgado was watching, listening, calculating, and apparently amused. What they needed now was to bait him into feeling overconfident, to believe that Karen was still in control of her turf and not being used as the focal point of a federal web. It was a high-stakes gamble, but Duke had played higher before. He wasn't worried about Delgado. He was worried about Karen. Karen had shifted from unhinged to something more dangerous, inspired. The attention she received after her stunt had filled her with a new level of energy. She had begun live-streaming daily HOA Freedom updates, which included things like flag-waving tips, neighborhood citizen patrol schedules, and advice on standing your ground against unauthorized vehicles. Most of the content was nonsense, but it was getting traction. She even set up a donation link, promising to use the funds to print educational flyers and possibly expand HOA influence into nearby developments that need order. What she was actually doing with the money, no one was sure, but Duke had a team quietly watching the Venmo trail. The next phase of the plan hinged on one thing: letting Karen believe she had won. Duke pulled the RV back into its original parking spot, right where the whole thing started, and left it there. No flashing lights this time. No sirens or announcements. Just silence. The door stayed shut. The windows remained tinted. Not a soul came or went from it. To the untrained eye, it looked like the federal government had backed down. Karen pounced on it. Within hours, she recorded a video standing in front of the RV with a giant grin, claiming victory. "The feds blinked first," she announced. "Let this be a lesson to all who try to intimidate the good people of Willow Ridge. The HOA stands strong." She actually said those words while standing beneath a glitter banner that said, "We the property owners." Duke watched the livestream with his head in his hand, equal parts entertained and horrified. But it was working. Delgado was watching too. 3 nights later, Delgado finally made a move. An unmarked van arrived at 3:13 a.m. and parked behind Karen's house. No lights, no engine noise. 2 men exited the vehicle and carried what looked like rolled-up turf and a large toolkit. They went through the back gate, not bothering with stealth. Karen, apparently unaware, slept soundly through the whole event. She would later claim she had trained herself to ignore lawn movement, whatever that meant. The surveillance team activated drones and infrared cameras. The men weren't there to do yard work. They were burying something. Later, agents would recover 2 fireproof cash boxes filled with unmarked bills and a plastic container with several burner phones, each connected to temporary lines registered to companies tied to Delgado's operation. One of those companies? A bogus tree trimming service Karen had vouched for in the last HOA budget meeting. That was the final piece. Duke gave the go-ahead for simultaneous raids. Delgado's residence, the fake companies, and the HOA office, which, amusingly, was just a converted spare room in Karen's house filled with binders, framed quotes, and a very expensive espresso machine she claimed was for guest diplomacy. At dawn, a convoy of black SUVs and armored vans rolled into Willow Ridge. Neighbors peered from behind curtains as federal agents spread out like clockwork. Delgado was arrested trying to climb out of a basement window in nothing but gym shorts and flip-flop. He didn't even deny the charges. Just shook his head and muttered, "All this over a neighborhood queen." At Karen's house, agents gently knocked before entering. She opened the door in a silk robe and full makeup, holding her phone, already live-streaming. "This is harassment," she said confidently. "You're on camera, and I know my rights." Duke stepped forward from the group, tipping his hat. "Yes, ma'am." and you're about to get a crash course on the rights you've been trampling for years." The expression on her face cracked for the first time. She glanced at the agents behind him, at the warrants in their hands, at the boxes they began sealing from her so-called office. When they opened her filing cabinets and started pulling out cash receipts for non-existent projects, she started asking questions. When they played back the audio of her approving a landscaping contract with a shell company, her voice lost its edge. And when they showed her a photo of herself shaking hands with Delgado at a neighborhood mixer, the color drained from her face. Karen wasn't arrested yet, but she was served with multiple subpoenas and informed she was the subject of an ongoing federal investigation into conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and possible financial crimes tied to organized laundering. She tried to save face by filming a quick government intimidation video on her porch, but it didn't land. The comments were brutal. Even her most loyal HOA allies had started to ghost her. The man who used to lead the garden club blocked her number. The woman who helped her organize the Easter parade called her a tyrant with a purse. Later that night, Duke stood outside the RV watching the cleanup. Delgado was gone. His files, assets, and accounts had been seized. The operation was over. But Karen's story wasn't finished. She had exposed something bigger than she realized, a culture of petty power twisted into a system of abuse. And while she hadn't meant to do it, she had become the face of HOA overreach in the digital age. Duke sipped his coffee and turned to Agent Colby, who was flipping through one of Karen's self-published HOA guidebook. She called this section Ethical Fining Practices, Colby said with a grin. Wrote 20 pages about how to ticket a toddler for sidewalk chalk. Duke shook his head. "We're gonna need a whole task force for suburban power trippers after this." And though the command center would be moving on to the next case soon, Duke knew this neighborhood, and its freshly humbled queen, would never be the same. The courtroom was quieter than anyone expected. Not the dramatic, packed spectacle Karen had hoped for, no protesters holding HOA pride signs or neighbors in solidarity. Just her lawyer, who looked like he'd been hired through a coupon app, and a handful of unimpressed observers in the gallery. The judge glanced through the stack of paperwork with visible fatigue. Federal interference, obstruction of justice, aiding a laundering operation, unlicensed security enforcement, misappropriation of funds. Karen's rap sheet read like a suburban dictator's resume. And still, she didn't seem to get it. She sat there with perfect posture, arms crossed, tapping one well-manicured finger on her planner, as if she were sitting through a zoning meeting rather than a hearing about her potential criminal liability. Sheriff Duke didn't even need to testify. The evidence was overwhelming. The paper trail was airtight. The surveillance footage was as clear as daytime. Karen had been recorded approving deals, issuing verbal threats to federal agents, and proudly live-streaming herself interfering with an active operation. Even the HOA's own internal chat logs were submitted, and one of the messages from Karen read, "If they don't move that monstrosity, I'll have it crushed, even if I have to push the button myself." When asked what button she was referring to, her lawyer tried to argue it was metaphorical. The judge was not amused. In the end, Karen wasn't sentenced to prison. Not yet, anyway. The financial crimes would take months to unravel in full, and whether she had knowingly helped a laundering operation or just blindly approved contracts out of arrogance was still under investigation. But she was barred from holding any HOA office, fined for obstruction and trespassing on federal property, and ordered to repay thousands in misused HOA funds. She also had to turn over her so-called HOA office to auditors. Every binder, every receipt, every one of her homemade compliance report templates with clip art gavels and eagle watermark. By the time she walked out of the courthouse, she looked smaller. Not just because she wore flats instead of her usual platform heels, but because the smug shine was gone. Her reign had ended, not with a march, but with a signature on a court order and a permanent ban from HOA leadership positions across the state. She tried to make one final public statement to a local news crew outside, but it was drowned out by a car backfiring and a random teenager yelling, "Free the lawn tyrant," as he skateboarded by. Duke didn't even watch the footage. He didn't need to. Justice didn't always come wrapped in orange jumpsuits and handcuffs. Sometimes it arrived in the form of a quiet, humiliating exit from power, witnessed by no one who still cared. Back in Willow Ridge, change happened faster than anyone expected. A special election was held to appoint a new HOA board. This time, the candidates were local parents, retirees, and one ex-military librarian who won by a landslide. Her campaign slogan had been, "Let's focus on potholes, not power trips." The community responded in full force. Rules were rewritten, fines were re-evaluated, and the monthly newsletter changed its name from the Willow Ridge Authority to simply Neighborhood Notes. The residents seemed lighter, more relaxed. Lawns were still mowed, but no one got threatening notes about mailbox paint anymore. Sheriff Duke made a quiet visit to the neighborhood during the transition. He didn't come in the RV this time, just his regular patrol car, unmarked and inconspicuous. A few neighbors waved. One elderly couple brought him cookies. Someone had even installed a welcome banner across Karen's former meeting table that read, "Thanks for saving our sanity." Duke smiled, nodded politely, and took the cookies. He wasn't one for speeches. But he did leave something behind. The next day, in the middle of the community park, a brand new bench appeared. It had a small plaque that read, "In honor of oversight, humor, and lawful parking, Sheriff Duke Riggins." No one claimed responsibility for installing it, but no one questioned it either. They just sat on it. Often. Karen, meanwhile, faded into the background. Her house remained on the market for weeks, the price steadily dropping. Rumor had it she'd moved in with a cousin 2 towns over and was trying to start a YouTube channel called Karen Unfiltered, but it never took off. Too many downvotes. Too many people remembered the video of her screaming at the sheriff's RV and then trying to argue that the Constitution gave her power over federally protected vehicles because the HOA dues counted as taxes. That video had become a meme, circulated with captions like, "When HOA meets CIA" and "Karen vs. the Command Center." Even national news had picked it up briefly under their "Oddly Enough" segment. One morning, Duke received a package at the sheriff's office. No return address, but the handwriting on the label was unmistakable, loopy, overly confident cursive with little hearts over the eyes. Inside was a copy of Karen's homemade HOA manual, the same one she used to wave around like gospel. There was a post-it note on the cover that read, "For archival purposes. You win." Duke flipped through it, chuckled at the section titled, "Dealing with Unauthorized Flora," and placed it on the shelf next to a retired taser and a framed photo of his K-9 partner. That book wasn't evidence anymore. It was a trophy. The case files on Delgado were sent off to federal prosecutors. More arrests followed in other counties as agents followed the trail through shell companies and ghost contracts. But none of it would have unraveled without Karen. In trying to assert her dominance over a single RV, she had pulled on a thread tied to an entire network. She had been loud, proud, and completely unaware that every one of her outbursts was turning into breadcrumbs for law enforcement. Her downfall had nothing to do with politics or personal grudges. It came from the simple fact that she was so sure she was right, she never stopped to consider she might be absolutely, spectacularly wrong. Months later, when Duke returned to Willow Ridge for a barbecue hosted by the new HOA, the energy was different. There were kids running around, dogs off leash, music playing, not loud enough to break any rules, just enough to feel like life was being lived freely. A couple neighbors joked about getting the sheriff his own parking spot next to the clubhouse. Someone offered to name a burger after him at the grill stand. He declined, but appreciated the gesture. What he appreciated more was the fact that nobody looked nervous anymore. People had opinions, of course, but no one was shouting through megaphones at 7 in the morning. As the sun set, Duke leaned against his car, watching a kid draw a chalk mural on the sidewalk. No one stopped her. No angry notices. No threats of citations. Just art. And laughter. And peace. Karen hadn't meant to start a revolution. But she had. And in her blind attempt to seize power, she'd inadvertently handed it back to the people who deserved it. The neighborhood wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. It just needed to belong to the people who lived there. Duke took one last look around, tipped his hat, and drove off down the quiet street. The RV was gone, the operation complete, but the message had landed loud and clear. Some battles aren't won in courtrooms or arrests. Some are won in backyards and barbecues, when people take their community back one rule, one laugh, and one badly drawn